Hi, this is Mike Green, otherwise known as Dodgy on the Lightwave forums. I'm just going to show you how my plugin Springy thingy works. Now, basically, Springy thingy is a motion modifier plugin. So that means you open up the motion options for an object and you add it as a motion modifier plugin there. And if you open the panel, you can see there's lots of options. So one of the things you can do, or one of the things you do with it, is make it follow another object. So you can select your other object and go use current item, and you can see it's snapped to where the item is in the world. Now if we animate that other item by pressing, say, play and then moving the item around, you can see it kind of follows the object in a lazy pattern. Now, rather than it being like the plugin which comes with Lightwave follower, this isn't based on time or distance, so it won't follow it precisely in the same path. What it does is it follows it in a kind of wobbly fashion, as if it's attached by a spring. So, for instance, if you go to the end of the animation, you can see it's wobbling around the object. Let's just delete some of these keys at the end. And you can see how it wiggles around it. I'll just extend the animation to 200 so you can see a bit more how it comes to a halt. You can see it's wobbling around lazily like that. Okay. And this might be a useful thing for if you want to sort of have one object follow another object, like a chase, like a fish following a hook, something like that. So it follows it in world coordinates and wobbles around. Now the settings on it, you've got a few. You've got mass, so that determines how heavy the object is supposedly. And the lighter something is, the faster it'll move after the other object, the more it'll swing around if it's heavier. There's a limit value, which I'll talk about in a second. There's a spring constant, because this reuses like real physics to determine how it moves. Spring constant is how much power there is pulling the object behind the other object, the light behind the camera. And then damping sort of damps down the energy, so rather than it going vibrating to an enormous amount, it'll calm down the motion of the object, so it won't be quite as frenetic as it could be. And then you can set the start time when it actually will start deviating from the object's path. So if we set that to sort of 1 in seconds, you can see now it's following it up until the point it gets to a second perfectly, and then it starts to wobble. So there you go, see it wobbles off there. So if I just bring that back up again, so that's useful if you want to suddenly have something split off from its parent or whatever it is that's following it. It's following. So if we change some of these values, so the damping, you can see that leaves it wobbling much more than it used to. It doesn't calm down as quickly as it did before and come to a stop. So if we set that back to 9 again, I'll just turn off the start time. So back down to 0, and you can see it's coming much more quickly to a halt. Excuse me. Now if we decrease the mass, so it's 0.1 say, you can see it's moving much more quickly, but it's also moving much more sort of energetically, because there's less mass holding it back. Put that back to 1. And you can see it's much more heavy in how it moves. Now if we put this spring constant down to 1 and then play, you can see it's really struggling to get going. So it's not really much moving much because the camera didn't overall move much. So it's not pulling it as hard as it should. If we set that, say, to 20, you can see it's following it much more quickly now, but with a much more energetic movement. So basically the spring constant and the mass kind of balance each other, but not entirely. So it's up to you what those kind of values you use. The limit function here, that gives you an overall limit of distance behind which it won't go. It won't lag too far behind. So if you've got something that's a bit more sort of pinned to another object, say, then you can set the limit. Now at the moment this limit is 0, and 0 means there's no limit at all. So if you want it to cling fairly tightly to another object, you set the limit to just above 0, and you can see it's not really moving much away from the camera. We set it to something a bit bigger, say 1. And then play through. You can see it's not moving much further behind the object than a meter. So you can envelope any of these settings so that the mass will change over time. You can make it sort of start off very heavy and slow and then speed up or whatever. You can change the limit, so perhaps you want it to lag behind quite a lot but then get closer and closer to the object until it's right on top of the object, and so on. And there you go. That is the plugin. I hope that you found that informative. It's useful for all sorts of things. A guy used it for fish in an animation he did, and sort of you can use it for, like, if you've got a null controlling a sort of muscle or something, then you could perhaps use it for that. One thing to note is, let me just bring that up again. If you're going to use it on a render farm, you might want to bake it, because it uses sort of the time the last time it evaluated. So on a render farm where you're moving from different frames, so you're not doing 1, 2, 3, 4, you might be doing 2, 6, 7, 9, whatever. You'll probably want it to be baked to a motion. Now if you want to do that, there's a useful plugin from Mentalfish, otherwise known as Peter Sunders, called MF Motion Baker, and this allows you to select a start and end time for that, so say 120, and then you can choose which channels to bake, and if you click OK, you can see it's going to do that. And then if you want to, you can turn off the springy thingy, and you can see it's baked the actual motion of the object to keyframes, which is very useful. So if you go to his web page, Mentalfish, mentalfish.com, Lightwave, it's got all these useful plugins, so big shout out there to Peter Sunders for that plugin. And there you go. It's, as I say, quite a useful plugin for make things wobble and whatnot. And I hope you'll get some use out of it.